So this question is asking, over the past semester of EDUC 4400, how have I used evidence from scholarly journal articles to evidence from my clinical teacher to student performance data to inform my perspective on an approach to teaching? So I kind of broke it down into 4 different pieces. So the very first thing was research for project or resources for projects. So with each project I had to use quite a bit of different resources, from online resources or books, to come up with my different projects and all the information that surrounded my projects. So for my first project, I had a lot of scholarly articles, books, and websites. For my project 2, I focused solely on a book that was written from a well-known educator. And then for project 3, I relied a lot on blogs and educational websites that had to do with developing a teaching philosophy, as well as the learning theories that I talked a lot about in my project. So with this, I would say that, it's an evidence, or these resources are evidence that of scholarly resources, that kind of thing, to improve my teaching practices over time, because it showed that I was able to take these resources and turn them into a project. So it showed that I could read each resource and to turn it into something of my own. So that's only going to change and improve my teaching over time. So that's what those show. My interview of my clinical teacher, which for the resources, I included a Google Doc, a hyperlink of that, so you can click on that and see the resources. For my interview of my clinical teacher, I also included that. So it's basically a paper that I've written. So I had 10 different questions for my clinical teacher, all of which had to do with parent contact, school offerings, and ELL students. And then from that point, I interviewed my clinical teacher, wrote down her answers, and then combined it into a paper so it was easier to read instead of the different questions being answered. So over the past semester, this was a good use, or a good way to show that I used my clinical teacher's knowledge to inform my perspective and approach on teaching, because I took all of that information that she taught me about parent contact, ELL students, and the things that schools offer to help students, and I was able to use that new information to help me in my senior 2 placement when I'm in the classroom every day, as well as using that in my own classroom when I do get that one of those in the future. So that was just a new perspective of what my clinical teacher was able to teach me, and how that's going to ultimately improve who I am and how I teach in the future. The next thing I talked about was student data, and I included a hyperlink to my last social studies lesson that I did teach my students. You can scroll down and see my lesson, but then if you scroll all the way down, you'll see student data, as well as answering a lot of different questions that have to do with student data. So this is cool because I was able to look at student data and talk about, the questions in my independent practice that may have been really well for the students and worked well for them. But I also was able to talk about what I would do differently next time, and what I would do to improve my students, improve my lesson, and to improve my student knowledge over time. So that just really speaks to this question, because that's just evidence of showing that I can take a lesson, teach it, look at my student data, and then from that point I'll improve my teaching from there. So if you scroll all the way down on that document, you can see all the student data. And then the last thing I talked about was project reflection. So with every project that we had in this course, we had to look back on our project and talk about what we learned, what we didn't intend on learning, the feedback from our peers, our strengths and weaknesses, anything we'd change, and if we had another week, what we'd do, and lastly, giving ourselves a grade. So this one has a lot to do with the student data, or has a big connection to student data, because I was able to look at my project and evaluate it myself and talk about what I would do differently next time to improve my teaching. So as a whole, each one of these resources really show evidence of me taking information and turning it around to improve my teaching over time. So the question is, again, over the past semester in EDUC 4400, how have I used evidence to inform my perspective on an approach to teaching? So like I said, I've used scholarly articles, books, blogs, and websites. I've interviewed my clinical teacher. I've shown student data, or I've used student data and my project reflections to show that I'm able to use information from websites to turn them into a project, which is something that's going to really affect my teaching, because I'm going to have to use different resources online in order to help my students and to improve my lessons. The interview from a clinical teacher shows that I'm able to take advice from other teachers in the field, which is really going to affect my teaching and to make me a better teacher. And then the student data and project reflections show that I'm able to look at things that I've completed and evaluate myself and improve and change them, which will only inform my perspective on an approach to teaching, as well as improving my teaching practice over time.